everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos. Today I am really excited because I have a leather pants video and I've wanted to do one for so long. Personally, for the size of pants that I created, I used less than 1.5 yards of fabric. The fabric I bought was less than $10, so I spent $15 on fabric, and then with thread and zippers, this project cost me $20. So this project was extremely inexpensive, and that is why you have to learn how to sew, because we gotta stop paying ridiculous prices for clothing. I've spent over 2 full 40-hour work weeks perfecting this pattern for you guys, so I'm super excited. It is on my Etsy right now. It is the first link in the description. I think patterns are a much better investment than actually buying leather pants, because you can make as many pairs of leather pants if you want, an infinite number of leather pants, and you don't have to use this for just leather. You can use it for any other stretchy pants material. Also in this video, I'm going to be teaching you 1, how to sew these pants from the pattern, and 2, how to work with leather. Of course, I'm not using real leather. I'm using vegan stretch leather. If you have been scared to work with leather in the past, don't worry, bro. I got you with all of these tips. Also, if you have been scared to sew pants, because I know pants are a very tricky thing, I got you with the full tutorial on how to sew a fly front and the full tutorial with how to sew these side front pockets. Those are 2 things that I know scare off a lot of people, so I'm going to go in depth with those things, and obviously the whole pair of pants. I got this leather from Joann's. It is my favorite leather that I've ever worked with. I will link the exact fabric down below. And also, as always, I'm going to be linking all of the supplies, equipment, tools, everything I use throughout this video down below. So yeah, I've worked incredibly hard on this pattern day and night for you guys, so I really hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy this video, so let's just get into it. Okay, starting with some leather tips and tricks. First of all, you cannot sew through leather twice. Well, you can, but if you take out a seam, there are going to be leftover holes there. Because leather is not actually a woven or knit fabric, the needle, when it punctures through the leather, is going to leave a permanent hole in there, so just be extra careful and cautious when sewing with leather. Another challenge when sewing with leather is it's a little bit sticky and it can get kind of caught in your machine, and it can be hard to feed the fabric through. You only really, though, have this issue when top stitching, because if you have the leather face to face, right sides together, the back side of the leather isn't usually sticky. Like the back side of this leather I'm working with is suede, so it'll feed right through my machine quite easily. However, when top stitching, I do recommend that you change your presser foot. You can change your presser foot to a walking foot or a roller foot, which those 2 can kind of be a little bit expensive. Or if you want to be more cheap like me, I'm going to be using a Teflon foot for all my top stitching. And a Teflon foot is just made out of a different material than your regular metal presser feet, so it can glide right over the leather really easily. Another tip when working with leather is to lengthen your stitch. Because when you're sewing with leather, you're essentially making a bunch of little holes throughout the leather. It creates kind of this perforated line that can be more prone to tears and ripping. So by lengthening your stitches, you're minimizing the chance that your leather will tear at the seams. Something else I like to do is when I'm top stitching, I will switch to either a heavy duty thread or a specific top stitching thread. Oh, and then something also really important is that you should probably change your needle. They do have leather specific needles, which you can use, although it's not like the end of the world if you don't use them. You should, however, use a more larger size needle, and for the top stitching, you need to use a needle that the thread can actually get through the eye of that needle. So when I'm top stitching, I'm actually using a size 16 needle. This one is kind of controversial, but people say it's a big no-no to iron your leather. Personally, I have always done this. It's always worked for me. I've never had any problems. However, if you're going to be ironing, pressing your seams, pressing the leather, you need to 1, put a press cloth over the leather. You cannot put the iron directly on that leather because it will just melt onto your iron. And 2, you also need to decrease the heat of your iron. So I usually put my iron on a more medium heat setting so that it doesn't melt the leather. Also, just to go along with that, you're never going to be able to really press a crisp line in the leather. The only reason I'm ever ironing over the leather is to attach either interfacing to that leather or to make a slight crease in the leather. I'm never trying to iron open my seams because it's just not going to work. That's why we're going to be top stitching over most of the seams so that everything can lay nice and flat. So those are all the tips that I have, so let's just get into the tutorial. So first off, I'm just printing out my pattern, of course, and do pay attention to what pages you're actually supposed to print out, because it will be different if you want to make pants with pockets or no pockets. Each page is both numbered and lettered, so you know exactly how to connect and tape out all of your pages. After you tape together all your pieces, determine what size you are based on the instruction pamphlet and then cut on the corresponding line. Whenever you're using a standard pattern, it's always a good idea to make a prototype first so you can make any adjustments necessary. Personally, I'll be working from the size 2 pattern, but I am quite tall, so I'll be lengthening the hem. Once you cut out all your pattern pieces, it's time to cut out your fabric. Because each pant leg is divided into 2 separate panel pieces, I'll be sewing those together first, so I'm left with 2 front pieces and 2 back pant pieces. And when working with leather, I do recommend you use clips as much as possible instead of pins, because pins will leave permanent holes in the fabric. I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew everything together before serging all of the raw edges. And it's actually not necessary that you use a serger. You could overlock with your home sewing machine or zigzag or do whatever you want, but you don't even need to finish the edges. I won't be mad at you if you don't finish the edges because the leather is actually not going to fray. It's just so it looks more professional on the inside. Using my Teflon foot and top stitching thread, I'm going to be top stitching down all of those seams we just sewed, and when top stitching, I'm going to be pushing the seam allowances towards the side of the pants and top stitching that down. And make sure you lengthen your stitch even more when top stitching, and this is what it should look like when you're done. Now onto the pockets. So the first thing you want to do is finish the edges of your pocket shields, and again, this is not completely necessary, do it if you want. And then I'm going to be placing my pocket shield on the pocket lining and stitching that down. Stitch it down only on the curved edge, and you can sew 1 or 2 rows of stitching. Now to attach the pocket to the actual pants. Place the lining right sides together with the pants and sew along that curve. And when you are sewing that curve, make sure you don't catch the seam allowance over here, and then after that, just trim down your seam allowance to be really thin so it's easy to flip that pocket right side out. Now we're going to top stitch the edge of that pocket so it can lay nice and flat. To close up my pocket, I'm going to be using a French seam, so fold your pocket in half with the shield on the outside and then just sew with a 1/4 inch on the bottom of that pocket. After that, you want to take your scissors and trim that seam allowance to be really thin, and then just flip the pocket inside out, and then you're going to do the same thing and sew the bottom of that pocket with a 1/4 inch seam allowance to complete your French seam. The last step for the pockets is to just baste everything together. Moving on to sewing the fly front, the first thing you want to do is interface your fly shield and your fly facing. Then fold your fly shield in half and sew along the bottom edge. After that, just turn that right side out and press it down. Now I'm going to finish the curved edge of the fly facing, I'm going to finish the straight and open edge of the fly shield, and I'm going to finish both crotch seams on the front pant pieces. Now I'm going to attach the fly facing to the pants with 3/8 of an inch as the seam allowance. Keep in mind, the front crotch is the only part of the pants that the seam allowance is not a 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to clip into that seam right below the fly facing, so the seam allowance on that front crotch can be treated and handled separately. Now I'm going to press open this seam before turning the fly facing under and pressing that in place. Now I'm going to top stitch to make sure everything stays nice and flat. Now I'm going to take my zipper and place it face down on the fly facing, and then I'm going to sew down on this side of the zipper tape. I'm using a 5-inch metal zipper. If you only have a long nylon zipper, that is a-okay. Make sure you do not cut the stopper off. Place the stopper of your nylon zipper exactly where I have my metal zipper stopper, and then there will be excess zipper hanging off the top waist of the pants, and then once you sew the waistband on, you'll be able to trim that excess zipper off. Now use the top stitching template I provided to you to mark out exactly where you want to sew that top stitch. However, before you sew, make sure you lift and pin that bottom right zipper tape out of the way so it doesn't get caught when you top stitch. Now we're going to place the fly shield on top of the zipper, grab the zipper and fly shield together, and that is actually where we're going to be stitching that together. And a little tip when working with zippers is to open and close your zipper based upon where you are in the seam, just so you can get a cleaner and straighter line. Now we're going to bring the other front pant piece into the equation and line that up with the other side of the zipper, and then I'm going to take my scissors and make a little clip into that seam allowance. Before I clip even further, I'm just going to line it up with the other pant leg and make sure that those clips are relatively in the same spot, because they should be, and then I'm going to clip further, so I clip into the full 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to fold under the top part of that seam and just press it with 3/8 of an inch for seam allowance, and then I'm going to place that on top of the zipper and stitch that down. Again, I did recommend to you to try and not use pins as much as possible, but this is really hard to keep in place without using pins, so I just use pins. It's okay, no one's gonna see that seam. Now for the remainder of the seam allowance in the crotch area, I'm going to turn under that front seam just 3/8 of an inch and press it. Then I'm going to line it on top of the other front crotch seam, and I'm just going to top stitch this down. This is a little bit tricky, so just take this really nice and slow, don't rush it. And then after that, you are actually done with your fly front. Next, I'm going to sew and serge the side seams. These are the seams that we just sewed, so I'm going to take those seam allowances and fold them towards the back and then top stitch those down. Now fold the pants in half so the back crotch seam is together, and then sew and serge that. I then top stitch that, and when I top stitch on the left of that seam. I top stitch on the left so that at the crotch area, the front and back top stitching will match up perfectly. Now just sew and serge the inseam, and you won't actually be able to top stitch this, but make sure you go very carefully when you sew this because the angles at the crotch are a little difficult. To make the belt loops, fold the belt loops in quarters and then top stitch on both sides. I place the front belt loops right on the inside of the panel seams and the back belt loops right on the outside of the panel seams. Then I like to just stay stitch those belt loops in place. Moving on to the waistband, I first interface it and then fold it in half and press it so that it's creased along the center. On one of the long edges, turn it up 1/2 inch and press it. Now for the waistband, I'm placing it at the waist seam with about 1 inch of it hanging off the edge, and your waistband will be a little bit longer than your waist seam just so that you have enough room to make sure it's nice and clean at the edge. And you'll see what I'm talking about right here. So after sewing your waistband on, fold it in half, right sides together, and stitch a little line up the edge. Clip off the excess, and when you turn it right sides out, you will have a perfectly finished waistband. Repeat this process on the other side as well. Now top stitch around all of those edges of the waistband, including the bottom edge, the top edge, and all the side edges. Just sew around one big rectangle. Now to finish off the belt loops, sew that belt loop down exactly where it is, about 1/2 inch from the waistband, so it has more space for your belt. See, like that. And then after that, fold the belt loop up and fold it in about 1/2 inch before placing it down and sewing that right on the edge. Use the hand wheel on your sewing machine when doing this, otherwise you will probably break a needle. For the closure, it's up to you. You can use a regular button if you want, but I don't want anything visible, so I'm sewing these 2 hook and eye bars. For the hem, make sure you do try on your pants beforehand in case you need to cut it shorter, but I have included a 1 inch hem allowance. You can either turn the hem 1/2 inch twice and then stitch it, however that may be bulky, so what I did was I serged the edge and then I turned it up once and stitched it. You could also use fabric glue. And after that, you are done. Woo! That is how you sew these leather pants. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you purchased the pattern, I hope you enjoy that too. Definitely let me know down below what your thoughts are on these pants and if you actually liked them or not, and also let me know if you're gonna actually try them out. And if you do try them out, girl, you better send me a picture. Please, it makes me smile. It makes me so incredibly happy when you guys send me photos of the things you've made from my tutorials. If you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up. It is the easiest way to support your favorite creators for free. Also, don't forget, if you have any questions about the supplies or equipment I used throughout this video, all of that information is in the description. And if you haven't already, definitely give me a follow on Instagram and TikTok. My handle is Kiana Bonolo. And yeah, I think that is everything. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week.